I want to begin with a philosophical statement from E.F. Schumacher, who wrote Small is Beautiful. I'll be referring to him again. He was a British economist, became famous in the 1970s and 80s. He said the real problems facing the planet are not economic. You keep hearing about economy, and they're not technical. They're philosophical. He went on to say the philosophy of unbridled materialism is now being challenged by events. Do you think that's an appropriate description of our philosophy in the last half of the 20th century? Beginning of the 21st century? I've been asking this question for many years now, and people come up to me afterwards and give me a more apt description of our philosophy, and no one has yet come up with a more apt description than unbridled materialism. We don't have to be stuck with a philosophy like this. In fact, as you will see, I'm implying maybe that will not be our philosophy by the time my kids are approaching my age, and maybe before that. It's not going to be a talk about much of my art. The first, I guess I'll include the first picture. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's called Cardinal Wild Apples. There's a picture of a cardinal and some wild apples, and it was based on Joni Mitchell's song, The Big Yellow Taxi. Why it's The Big Yellow Taxi, I have no idea. But some of you, probably many of you know that. I could actually attempt to sing The Big Yellow Taxi, not like Joni, and that would really sum up my talk. It's, if it begins, you take all the trees and you put them in a tree museum, and you charge all the people $1.50 just to see them. Here's the philosophy. Don't it always seem to go? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. You pave paradise and you put up a parking lot. Then the next one, say to the farmer, put away your DDT. Save me spots on apples, give me spots on apples, but save me the birds and the bees. Don't it always seem to go, etc., etc. And this is a painting of our apple tree, which we don't spray, of course, and it was in Ontario, so there's a cardinal in it, and there's spots all over the apples. And I asked this rhetorical question: would you buy apples with spots on them, which, if it meant we wouldn't have to spray poisons all over them? And if your answer is no, you'd rather spray poisons and not have spots, I've got news for you. Apple spot won't hurt you. In fact, if you shut your eyes, you don't even know you're biting apple spot. In fact, my grandmother ate apples with spots on them all of her life, and she did not die from apple spot. And I was honored to speak at a huge annual meeting of the Society of Environmental Toxicologists in Washington a few years ago, and I asked the audience, all full of really smart people, toxicologists who work for Shell and BP and independent organizations. I said, we've been spraying poisons on our crops for the last 50 years. How many pests have we eliminated? And all over the audience, hands went up with a goose egg. None. We've not eliminated one pest, but we've eliminated a lot of beneficial insects. And we keep on spraying poisons all over our plants. I heard just a few weeks ago, it was in an article on what's happening to honeybees and other things that are fertilizing our fruits. I think it was Einstein, this sounds a bit unplausible, so it was many years ago, said, when we lose the honeybee, and I'm saying in the other pollinators, mankind has about 4 years. What are we doing? We've been doing a lot of insane things and barely getting by with it during the last many decades, probably starting in 1950. This is, I think, maybe my most important painting. It's a scene in a drift net. You'll be able to see the original from the 26th of May on at the Bateman Foundation, which I'm coming to at the end. It actually has a real drift net stretched over the painting. It's a very tragic picture, obviously. These are two critters caught and drowned. They're both air breathers, a Laysan albatross and a Pacific white-sided dolphin. And they're known euphemistically as bycatch in the industry. In other words, creatures that have been caught accidentally by mistake with our cheap way of fishing, and they're dead, they're garbage, and they're dumped over as garbage. 1 million birds die this way every year, and 1 million mammals Porpoises, whales, and dolphins die this way every year. I think needlessly, it's because of our philosophy, we want to do things quick and dirty and cheap. I don't know if you like shrimp, but commercially caught shrimp results in, I think it's 7 to 1, 7 kilos of bycatch for every kilo of shrimp. So if you eat that kind of shrimp, you're part of the problem, as I would be part of the problem if I do it too. Is it necessary? No, it's not necessary. I spoke to a shrimp fisherman a few years ago from Nova Scotia. I said, how much bycatch do you have? He says, I have none. Why is that? He said, because I devised these stainless steel meshes that steer the shrimp away from the undersized shrimp and the fish away from the shrimp traps. So I get 100% commercial shrimp. But he says the problem is it costs $5,000 a month to refurbish the stainless steel, because even though it's stainless, it corrodes. Okay, I have 2 rhetorical questions. The second one I think is the most important question facing the planet. Philosophical question in a way. First of all, if every shrimp fisherman did this, would it raise the price of shrimp? Well, yes, of course it would. Second question is it worth it? Is it worth it to pay a few more pennies for our shrimp, a few more pennies for our energy, a few more pennies for our apples and other agricultural products, a few more pennies for everything, if it meant we could have a good future for our children? The reason we're in jeopardy is we're too cheap. What's his name? I always have a mental block on this famous author who just died, and I'm trying to think of his book as well. He lived on Long Island. Anyway, he died about 4 or 5 years ago. It's a German name, might come to me. I can't even think of his most famous book. Slaughterhouse-Five, that's his name. Kurt Vonnegut. Yeah, Kurt Vonnegut said, we could have saved the world, but we were too cheap. It's really as simple as that. We know what we have to do. All we have to do is pay for it. And pay for it by means of higher prices and higher taxes, etc., etc. It's really simple, and it's a philosophical question. Woody Allen was asked one time how to define nature. He said, nature is basically one big restaurant, which it is. But something's eating something else throughout nature. But one thing nature is not is a free lunch. There is no free lunch. And you can pay now or pay later. And just like buying a car, if you pay later, it's going to cost a whole lot more. And that's what we seem to do as a society, and we welcome industry doing it as a society. It's called externalizing costs. So we privatize profits, and we externalize so future generations and all the rest of the public have to pay the price for it. As I say, it's a philosophical question. John Glenn was asked, the guy who first went into orbit, he was asked, what were your thoughts seconds before blastoff? He said, seconds before blastoff, I was thinking, every job on this project went to the lowest bidder. Every job in Project Earth seems to be going to the lowest bidder. Okay, enough of that. Now, the rest, as this whole wonderful festival is dedicated and to more of a positive look out on the future. I'm going to be going up and down, positive, negative, but generally speaking, I'm positive. That's supposed to be me. Well, it is actually me. Going for a walk, which Birgit and I do every day for 40 minutes or so, and then I try to get out first thing in the morning as well. Just walking in ordinary nature near me. I was asked one time, I was in Prince George at the university, and during the question period afterwards, I was asked, how do you get up in the morning? How come you don't lie awake all night? Think of all these problems, which I talk about, and I've been thinking in series about since the 1960s. Let me tell you, I don't lose one wink of sleep over these kind of problems. It may be just me, but I don't worry about them. I think worrying is the stupidest thing. Let me quote Mark Twain. Mark Twain said, you know, some of the worst things in my life never happened. I'm of a certain age, some of you might know, having been born in 1930. And I like this quote too. He said that getting old is a question of mind over matter. If you don't mind, doesn't matter. He's a pretty smart guy. So there's me not worrying. And I literally don't. I follow the, I've never been an alcoholic. My nickname's One Beer Bateman. I get pie-eyed on one beer. I wouldn't dream of driving. So I'm a cheap drunk. But I like the slogan about Alcoholics Anonymous, which I can't quote exactly. If you can fix something, some problem, go ahead and do it. If you can't fix something, then forget about it. If you, and then God grant me the wisdom to know the difference between the two. So I try to do whatever stuff I think I can have some effect on. And the other stuff, why worry about it? It's really, in a sense, and to get, I guess we're in a religious institution. I came in the back door. And, the name indicates we are. I think it's actually a sin to go around worrying when you could have the beautiful planet to enjoy. You're wrecking your appreciation for the beautiful planet. So don't worry. It may not happen anyway. But try to do something. So what I would recommend, if you're getting down the dumps, is get up from wherever you are, go out, find a tree, address the tree, and say, thank you. Because botany is on our side, big time. And we should be very appreciative, and appreciation is one of the best solutions for worrying. Appreciation and gratitude is a better word. If you can't find a tree, a dandelion will do. Address the dandelion and say thank you. It's given off good stuff for us. Now, I'm evolving this thesis here. It's a little based a bit on some books that I'm going to mention. It has to do with petroleum. See, I'm an old guy, as you already know. I was born in the kind of the heart of the Depression, 1930. I was a kid during World War II, 15 when World War II was over. Started teaching in 1955. And around 1950, I watched the world change with the post-war boom. And the reason it changed was because of oil, of petroleum, which is a very, very highly potent liquefied form of energy, which we're coming to the end of, which I'm going to mention later. This is, I think, a ray of hope, not a ray of despair. So all of us here in this room are living in a beautiful bubble. And that bubble started to grow around 1950. And it is unbelievably fantastic. My mother, by the way, was born before the age of oil in Spring Hill, Nova Scotia, a middle-class family. They had the first Model T in town. But she grew up cooking, her family cooked over a flame, lit at night to read a book or the Bible or whatever it was at night with a flame, traveled by horse or on foot, horse and sleigh or horse and carriage, or by sail. How long had mankind been doing that? 2,000 years, 3,000 years? My mom was still doing his ordinary everyday things. My same mother saw a man walk on the moon. Can you rate when this bubble was really getting going? Can you imagine the changes that have taken place because of this bubble? And now the interesting question is, by the way, I don't believe that we're in a economic downturn. I believe we're at the end of growth. Maybe I'm wrong, but there's a lot of smart people that are kind of pointing to that. So the bubble is either going to shrink or burst, but things are likely to change. And I think it's a good thing, certainly a good thing for nature. Next. Oh, next. I'm next. So, a whole bunch of books are coming out on this. I read this about 10 years ago. The Transition Handbook, written by a British guy, Rob Hopkins. Moving from oil dependency to local resilience. That's what we have to start learning to do. And a number of you have already heard of it and probably already moving in that direction. I read this book first. I heard it on the Current. By the way, as I get up in the morning, virtually my only domestic duty is I do the dishes from the night before. I paint until about 10 o'clock at night, and I postpone the dishes when I'm kind of dopey first thing in the morning. It's very soothing and zen-like. So I'm doing the dishes, and I'm listening to the CBC, The Current, on AM radio. That's probably FM here too. And a whole bunch of authors, such as Jeff Rubin, I hear about the book and I send away and buy it or try to buy it locally. Why Your World is About to Get a Whole Lot Smaller by Jeff Rubin, Oil and the End of Globalization. And he was the head of world markets for the Canadian Bureau of Bank of Commerce. So he's a smart guy, and he studies world markets, and he says the world is going to contract and get a whole lot smaller, and his prediction, because the cost of transportation is going to go up, is that forget about Walmart. Well, Walmart will have to sell made in Canada stuff, because the cost of transportation will be so you'll be able to go to stores in the future and it'll say made in, gee, isn't that a weird thought? Made in Canada on the shelves in the stores. Yeah. It's going to happen due to market forces, not due to the good. I've kind of given up, except for people in this room, having things happen because of the good of people's hearts. It's a lot of things happen because of market forces, and I think this is one that would be in that case. It's going to bring communities together. Agriculture and manufacturing will come back to suburbia and be local and Canadian. China will have to look and they already know this, will have to make domestic markets to sell their stuff to. So the world is going to get a whole lot smaller. And coming back to Schumacher, you have Schumacher. His holy trinity is health, beauty, and permanence. Health, everybody goes for that. Beauty, yeah, of course. Permanence, who ever thought of permanence in the 20th century and now the 21st century? That is a weird thought. You only hear we need growth. The only way we're going to get ahead is we're going to have growth. We have to have growth, have to have growth. You never hear any of the politicians or big businesses say, we need permanence. Think about it. We do need permanence. We cannot continue growing forever. The only thing is philosophy is growing forever is the cancer cell. And we're reaching the limits of growth in so many different departments, and it is not a good thing. So we're going to be concentrating on permanence, but growth has been promoted big time, really big time, especially among teenagers, and many of you were teenagers in the 50s when I started teaching. The corporations and everybody in government, everybody in general, have played on these human qualities that we have evolved for maybe 1 million years, and we can't help it. We're hardwired for getting dopamine. You know, it's the pleasure hormone, if that's what it is. Anyways, we have it in our systems, and when we get pleasure, our dopamine goes up, and we get dopamine rewards from doing those 3 things, which I'll go over just briefly in a moment. The only way an organism, whether you're a worm or a chimp or whatever, can survive is to have nourishment, have reproduction, and have protection. Otherwise you'll become extinct. So those have been the driving forces for evolution. We're hardwired for them, we can't help it. However, although we evolved for 1 million years in scarcity, since that bubble started, we live in a world of abundance and cheap abundance. So now we have to start using a little bit of self-control, or in a sense we're doomed. So you take nourishment and you keep going with it, and you end up with gluttony, and you end up with obesity. How long did it take our ancestors to get the amount of calories in a Big Mac? How long does it take a kid or you to get the amount of calories in a Big Mac? How difficult is it? How much do you have to put into it? You don't. Everything is readily available. That's one of my theories of why we needed religions, why we needed churches, because they could see, once man started to get civilized, he could have a lot of stuff that maybe he should use self-control about. And so they made up rules of religion, etc. And I don't know if you've heard about the marshmallow test, but it applies here, but I'm not going to take time because I'm rushing. I'm hoping to catch the 5 o'clock ferry back to Salt Spring. Reproduction, obviously, there's another word for it, a 3-letter word, starting with S and ending with X. And too much of that can lead to lust, and then too much more can lead to pornography. We're hardwired for it. I hope all of you know what I'm talking about here, but it's something. And these things, by the way, none of these things are logical, common sense. I mean, basically, nourishment, you take dead plant and animal material and poke it in a hole in one end, and it comes out a hole in the other end. That is disgusting. But if it's very high calorie, if it has lots of sugar in it, it has lots of fat in it, and in some cases lots of salt in it, we're seduced by it because we've evolved for it. and there's nothing we can do about it. And the same with reproduction. Two organisms who look different from each other coming together, it could be dangerous, it could be disgusting. However, we get, well, speaking for myself, a great dopamine hit. Can you remember your first kiss? Well, I'm not going to go there, but mine was memorable, probably all of yours are memorable. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. But when that gets out of control, and it gets pushed and pushed and pushed to sell products, etc., it then goes into lust and pornography. Someone did a comparison. I'm going to touch on drugs briefly here. Let's say a really, really romantic kiss. I don't know how you measure dopamine. It gives you a dopamine measure of 100. It's something you'll never forget, and your heart's beating faster, etc., evidently, a hit from crack cocaine is 1,500 in pleasure, getting injected with pleasure. There's absolutely no comparison. There's only one catch. It closes off your dopamine releasers by pushing them that far, and you can't get pleasure anymore. It's over. There's no free lunch. And moving down to violence, which more or less pertains to males than females, and it's pumped by testosterone, yields to violence and destruction, etc. Think back on the Stanley Cup riots. Were those guys that were out there smashing windows happy, or were they angry? They were happy. They were having a ball, and the booze helps it as well. This applies to a lot of soldiers who are out there, etc. I don't know if those crazy bombers in Boston had big smiles on their faces when they heard the bombs go off, but I bet you they did. Of course, they're not smiling now. There's no free lunch. And these are all areas that we have to pay attention to. We're hardwired for them, we can't help it, but are they a good idea? And to quote Schumacher again, if human vices are systematically cultivated, which happens with the advertising industry, it will inevitably lead to nothing short of the collapse of intelligence. And that is what I suggest our society is suffering from. And it's especially inflicted on young people who have no defenses against it because they're hardwired. And so we've been starting to train kids to be this way on Saturday morning cartoons. I remember I've been kind of ranting against this since the 1960s. Actually, the 1950s. I started teaching, as I said, in 55, which was the first year that Elvis was on the Ed Sullivan Show, by the way. The younger ones in the room may not realize this, but whole families used to watch the same television show. I mean, that's pretty weird. And it was always on Sunday night. And so Monday morning, I remember this, the grade 10 girls were all, it was Elvis Presley. Grade 10 girls were all a quiver, and I couldn't settle them down. I said, "Oh, did you see him, sir? Did you see him?" I was rolling on the living room floor, squealing. My father was telling me to get up. Oh, he was fabulous. I said, "Listen, another 10 or 15 years, you will have never heard of Elvis Presley again." So now you know you can believe everything I say. But I remember giving in my talks, which I started doing in the 60s, the idea of family values for many future parents will be based on the Flintstones, because they weren't raised by families. They were raised by products. And as you know, the cartoons are delivery systems for the products. And so there's whole grown-ups, maybe there's some in this audience, who were raised by television. And so their idea of a normal thing is to stare at a screen all day. And we now know that a kid who is under 3 should not even look at a television set. They should walk through the room quite quickly if there's a television set, because their brain is being wired at that time, and it can be wired in unfortunate ways by even seeing television, let alone the content. And so we've now arrived at this species, which I call Homo sapiens teenager consumerensis. And many of them, I don't think it's a majority, thank goodness. And of course, it's no kid that you would know. It doesn't describe your kid or your grandkid, and it doesn't describe our kids or grandkids either, but it describes a frightening number of kids who spend all their time staring at screens, filling their bodies with junk food for the body, and filling their brains with junk food for the soul. I have no objection whatever to electronic devices. And, you know, here's a secret. I use an iPad myself, and as reference for my paintings. I don't know how to do email and that kind of thing, but I do use an iPad. They're very, very handy, and cell phones are handy for emergencies and that kind of thing. However, I've heard it said that the average young person in North America spends 7 hours a day, 7 days a week. They don't take the weekend off, looking at a screen. That's almost a full work day. How much time do they spend in nature? The average kid, not at all. You used to see parks full of kids on Saturdays and Sundays just playing around, kicking a soccer ball or whatever. When I was growing up, I never heard of a soccer mom. What's a soccer mom? Why do we need adult supervision for kids playing outside? That's a weird thought. It's never happened in human history until about 20 years ago. And now it seems to be getting more and more intensified. It's a very, very strange idea. We had a soccer ball, we had a park, we didn't need adult supervision. I've even heard it said that some mothers are afraid to let their kids play outside in nature. Well, that is complete nonsense. There isn't going to be some dirty old man hiding behind a tree for months and months and months hoping a kid's going to walk by. Most harm done to kids is done by somebody who's known to the family. The father, the uncle, the man across the street is most likely. And besides, kids always played in groups. I have never heard of a group abduction, except for the Pied Piper family, and he's fiction. So we always played in groups. So that everybody here, when your kids playing, when you're playing outside, you play with a bunch of your friends. It's perfectly safe. If it isn't 100% safe, here's something else to think about. You cannot build resilience in young people without risk. If you think it's safe to put your kid in front of a screen and they're safe, we don't need adult supervision outside, we need adult supervision inside. Have you ever heard of internet predators? Ever heard of cyberbullying? Ever heard of internet pornography? That's where the supervision is needed, and I think it's lacking. But it's really, really hard to detect and to do the supervision. There was a cartoon a few years ago, two young boys sitting on a stoop, and one boy says to the other, "What are you going to be if you grow up?" If you grow up. This is the first generation where many young people will die before their parents die. And they'll die from things like early onset diabetes, obesity, well, outgrowth of obesity, depression, suicide, drugs, alcohol abuse, all those kinds of things are increasing with this kind of lifestyle. And it's actually becoming an epidemic. And so this is a very, very dangerous way if we think we should raise our kids in this way. And that's one of the things that the Bateman Foundation is going to be concentrating on, trying to turn this great thing around. So I mentioned junk food for the soul, and content does matter. So the stuff that I pay attention a little bit to what's going on. It seems, I've actually never sat through a video game, but I've heard about them. What is it about explosions nowadays with younger children? Everything seems to have to go. Well, we had a couple of in Boston quite recently too. I guess they're very exciting. If you're totally bored and you need more dopamine stimulation, maybe boom is wonderful. Everything seems to be getting weirder and more far out and more violent and more artificial. Think of the movies that seem to appeal to kids. They're all full of explosions. They're all full of wild kind of animation. Or they're full of Armageddon and the end of the world. Is that great stuff to be putting in kids' brains? And it's getting so boring that you have to keep pumping it up more and more. I heard the New York Times movie critic one time saying, movies have got so boring with all the stimulation. The stimulation is really, it's way more exciting to watch Humphrey Bogart light a cigarette. And some of the older folks know what I mean here. There's more thrill to it than the end of the world. What's all this about vampires? Is that great stuff for helping kids appreciate the planet Earth that God made and so on? How about Walking Dead? I've only heard about it, I haven't actually seen it. Maybe some of you are experts on it. If it's a great, compelling thing that we should be digesting in young people. Little minds are interested in the extraordinary. Great minds in the commonplace. Are we building a whole new species of little minds? If this is an increasing phenomenon, I think it's a concern. This is a Salish, not Salish, Cowichan elder. His name is Wentham, but I call him Fred. He's usually called Fred, I guess. And he said something very, very wise. He lives near Duncan. He said something very, very wise. He said, you know, we've been spending a lot of time talking about what kind of world are we leaving for our children. He said, we've got to start talking about an even more important question. What kind of children are we leaving for our world? So how are these kids that are 7 hours a day, 7 days a week, how are they going to vote when they grow up? What's going to happen to voting patterns? How are they going to vote with their dollars as consumers? What are they going to be spending it on? Are they going to be in favor of higher taxes for protecting the environment? What kind of stories are they going to tell their grandchildren? About the good old days of Grand Theft Auto? This is happening right now, and I think it has serious implications for nature and everything else on the planet. So what we need is free-range kids. These are some free-range chickens. And we need all of our kids to be free-range. It's a painting I did. Birgit and I lived in Bavaria for a year, so she was born in Germany, and we lived in a 200-year-old farmhouse there, so our boys could learn to speak German before they were 12 years old. So those were a couple of our chickens. And the great guru of free-range kids, and many of you already know him and have read this book, is Richard Louv, Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And in the book, Richard Louv, who's a researcher, he's a journalist from San Diego, he says if kids just play around a significant amount of their time, half of their time, spare time, out in nature, here's what happens. Less attention deficit disorder, less obesity, less depression, less suicide, less drug abuse, less alcohol abuse, less bullying, and higher marks. What are the main problems facing kids? I just gave you the list. In fact, the main problem facing a lot of adults, too. Something about nature is magic. There's a lot of research being done really recently. This is hot, off the press neuroscience being done at Harvard and all kinds of other places on the healing effects of nature. This is seen in Tokyo in a garden. There's a new movement starting in Japan of taking uptight office workers, and if there's anybody uptight that's an office worker in Tokyo, all you do is take a group of them for a walk in the woods. And there's woods all over Tokyo, by the way. Japan's a pretty smart place. And there's parks and gardens and temples and shrines and so on, right in the urban centers. They just go for a walk in the woods for under an hour. And by the way, this is recent research. The trees are spritzing chemicals, aerosols, that our cells have evolved for millions of years. And our cells celebrate. And you possibly notice this when you just go for a walk in nature. What happens immediately is their blood pressure comes down, their cortisol or fight or flight hormone comes down, their immune system improves a little bit, but measurably, and their acuity improves, and they go back into the office, having taken a big chunk of an hour, way more efficient workers. It really pays the companies to take them for a walk in the woods. Forest therapy, it's a whole new movement in Japan. That's all they do. And they do it every 2 or 3 weeks, just for an hour. It works. This is, I like this movie. My brother hated it, but anyway, it's The Color Purple. Some great stars, of course, Oprah was in it. and Whoopi Goldberg. And one of the line in the movie where the title comes from is as follows. I hope I'm forgiven if I use an off-color word in a sacred room, but this is Whoopi Goldberg. The character says, "You know, I think it really pisses God off if you walk past a field of flowers the color purple and you don't even notice." Well, we don't want to go around pissing God off, do we? Even if you don't believe in Him, it's not a good idea. How many of us have really noticed? Well, you're Victoria people, so you're extra sensitive, but boy, if there's ever a time and a place to celebrate, it's right this week in Victoria, with the blossoms in the trees and the stuff. There is so much to notice and inhale. We are so lucky. And speaking of gratitude, I consider the people in this room are the luckiest people who have ever lived in the history of the planet and probably ever will live. Partly because of geography and our privileged condition, etc. But being here. Next. Not next. So here's kids noticing. This is a wonderful organization, the BC Junior Naturalist organization. They're not relaxing. By the way, the one with a brown jacket is an adult. It's either a mother or a teacher. And these kids are observing. They're out in nature, and it could be a family, but it could be a class as well. They're actually studying treetops. So they're busily working at studying treetops. So you can do it as a part of a course of study, but you should do it sort of 90% of the time. 10% of course of study, 90% of the time, just do it for fun, just because it's wonderful. That's my wife Birgit and our two sons, Christopher and Robbie, who are now both dads and both live in Victoria. Just horsing around in the leaves. Can you smell the leaves in the fall? Talk about inhaling. And here's my older three kids, who are now all grown up. Sarah in the middle is very, very actively engaged with Salt Spring Island and outdoor education for kids. And they're on Botanical Beach and doing what I bet if you grew up here, you'd have all done that with the bull kelp. Here's a bunch of kids and their friends. They got face masks on and they're observing the aquatic life of the little minnows and stuff like that. But okay. Now coming down to the denouement. I'm the guy on the far side. I guess I haven't changed that much since last summer. Having a beer with Richard Louv, the famous Richard Louv. So this is a name dropping. I wanted to show you I'm sitting beside Richard Louv, the great guru. And this is a huge annual meeting he has every other year at a great facility on the Shenandoah River in West Virginia, and the other years in the San Diego area. And it was a big conference, not of kids, but of adults representing, I don't know how many, whether it was 100 or 200 organizations that are doing the kind of stuff that I'm talking about doing, and I bet you don't know about them. Okay, this was one of the sessions, and on the stage at this end is a guy called Dave Room. He represents Patches Pajamas, a multimedia effort to celebrate what is cool to reach young people. His organization is called Patches Pajamas. Brother Yusuf Burgess, he's the guy with the Afro-American with a white beanie, transforms young people's lives by direct experiences in nature, including kayaking, canoeing, and more. Juan Martinez, he was the coolest guy there. He was in his 20s, so naturally he's wearing his baseball cap inside. He's into development of natural leaders through nature for 15 to 24-year-olds in low-income areas. And Janice Sawwood, coordinator of nature clubs and families, I think in Indiana. Then Veronica Kyle, the black woman who's just gesturing. Faith in Place, nature-based experiences to and through more than 1,000 faith-based organizations. And Betsy Townsend, Leave No Child Inside of Greater Cincinnati. I bet you $1, except for Paul, none of you have heard of any of them. We were there for 2 nights, and I had an epiphany. I woke up early in the morning of the second night, and I said, look at these fantastic people. There's over 100 people representing thousands of people, and I've never heard of them. and I'm part of the choir, just like you're part of the choir. Who are coming. I know I'm aware I'm preaching to the choir right now, but I may be giving you ammunition to go forth and continue the preaching. That's shameful. Now, one of the things we're hoping that the Bateman Foundation will be able to do will be like a megaphone to tell everybody in the world this is a major issue. And here's all the great stuff that's being done right now. So that everybody hears it. I want it to become the talk of the town, just the way AIDS is, just the way gay marriage is. I bet you've all heard of AIDS. I bet you've all heard of gay marriage. Well, it's up there in people's consciousness. And, you know, Mothers Against Drugs, all those, they're wonderful causes. But we've got a wonderful cause that nobody's ever heard of. So I'm hoping, and we're in our infancy now, but this is one of the things we can do. In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand. We will understand only what we are taught. And by the way, we didn't mention what I'm sure everybody knows by now, but the Bateman Center is what used to be the old wax museum. It's a beautiful white classical revival building right on the Inner Harbor of Victoria. And the opening is the 24th of May, which is my 83rd birthday. And it's going to be open to the public the following day and the day after that, free of charge. I think some tickets are being handed out here. And then from then on, it's going to be the Bateman Center. And the top floor is going to be like a think tank to try to promote some of the stuff I've been talking about. And finally, I'd like to quote a famous 20th century philosopher. He said, "Some may call me a dreamer." Oh, his name is John Lennon, by the way. "Some may call me a dreamer, but I'm not the only one." Fellow dreamers, thank you.